So, well, let me just start by saying a long time ago, when I was maybe around 20, I went with some friends to Lake Erie, which is a place in Ohio you might have heard of. And there are these huge boulders in a line that are intended to stop erosion, I think, that breakwaters. And I thought it would be fun to go out with my friend and just leap along the rocks. And it was fun up until I fell on my butt. And when I fell on my butt, I looked down and I saw these sharp edges in this dark water, and I realized I could have died. And the reason I tell you this is because what happened next was I couldn't get up and go back. I was too paralyzed, too scared to be functional. So I had to sit there for a long time until I figured out a way to get up and walk back. And so that was an effect of safety of a physical sort on my mental state. So, second story. This is a puzzle called a nonogram. And the way nonograms work is you're supposed to figure out how many, or where to put the X's in each row and column. So where there's a 4 at the top, it means that there are 4 X's below it, but you don't know where those 4 X's go. You know they're contiguous, but they could be at the top or the bottom. The one where it says 3 space 1, you know that there's 3 and then a space and then 1, so there's only one way to do that one, so that's where you start. And then you work through it and figure out where everything goes. So this is a hobby of mine. I like to do them. And one day, I was having a fight with someone that I care about a lot, and it was really unpleasant. And I was having all sorts of feelings. I was feeling not just angry, but I was feeling scared and ashamed, I think. All sorts of really scary feelings, unpleasant feelings. And I sat down to do some of my favorite puzzles. By the way, this is what real ones look like. I sat down to do them, and I went through a puzzle, and I got to the very end, and there was a contradiction, and it didn't work. And so I did it again, and there was still a contradiction, and it didn't work. So I did a different one, and I couldn't do that one either. And that was the day, that was the very moment when I learned that when I'm upset, ashamed, scared, distraught, I am not rational. I told this to my grown son, that I discovered this, and he goes, "Yeah, no kidding." I was kind of mortified, but that is true. So when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about the ability to speak up, to speak out, to say what's on your mind, to fully participate without fear of consequences. And the consequences could be, it could be career-related, right? Which is sort of outside the scope of this talk. You could be fired. But it also is like rejection, ridicule, people looking down on you, that sort of thing. Okay, side note, if you use your phone as a remote, you can actually get a call while you're in the middle of a talk, and the remote will disappear. Who knew? Okay. So this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there's absence of threat or safety. I always think of that. I always picture when I see that a comet coming down right at you. I don't know why. But that's the threat I picture. Anyway, I think that psychological safety is up toward the top of absence of threat, close to belonging. It's not being free of a comet coming at your face, but it's not necessarily the need for love and belonging. So before I go on, I have a request of you. And I want you to feel free to decline and just sit there and ignore me. What I'm going to offer you is the opportunity to do a little exercise, a mindfulness exercise. So if you choose to participate, I invite you to close your eyes. Without trying to change anything, notice your breathing. Notice how the air feels entering your body. Notice whether it's fast or slow, deep or shallow. And then turn your attention to your body. What do your feet feel like on the floor? What does gravity feel like holding you down? And notice what sounds you can hear. Maybe you have smells you can detect or a taste in your mouth. Turn your attention back to your breathing and let it fall into a long, slow rhythm. Notice if you have any thoughts running through your head. Just notice them and let them go. Or if you have any feelings come up tied to those thoughts. And then turn your attention back to your breath. And when you're ready, open your eyes. Okay, so why do we do that? I do that because a lot of times I'm all business or I'm all up in my head, and it's harder to focus on the stuff that I want to talk about today. So I do that to get us all into a mind space where we can do more emotional work and less brain work. So safety is a kind of resilience. It gives you space to do hard work. If you're not safe, then all you can handle is comfort. When I wasn't safe on the rocks, when I didn't feel safe on the rocks, all I could do was sit there. I couldn't do the hard work of getting back until I convinced myself to be safe. Comfort comes in many forms. For some people, it's watching TV. For some people, it's drinking or eating ice cream. But if we're under duress, we don't have the resilience to do hard work. We only have the resilience to seek comfort. So the goal is to build safety in order to have the resilience to do hard work, to be creative, build things together as a team. Hello. So a quick history, a quick trek through psychological safety history. Have you heard of Project Aristotle? Some of you? In 2012, Google undertook a study to figure out what their high-functioning teams had in common. And it wasn't education level. It wasn't technical skill. It wasn't even whether the whole team was extroverts or introverts or whether they went out for beer after work. The number one thing that they came up with was that the team had a sense of psychological safety. In 1999, this is Amy Edmondson. She's a researcher at Harvard, and she writes about the importance of psychological safety. For example, in medicine, the ability for a nurse to speak up when a doctor's about to make a horrible mistake, as an example. Amy Edmondson says that if you want to build a culture of psychological safety, these are the three things you need to do. Frame the work as inherently uncertain instead of as an execution problem. Expose your own fallibility, and model curiosity. So hold that thought, because we're going to talk more about the hard part. 1965, Edgar Schein and Warren Bennis introduced the term psychological safety. In order for, I'm substituting the word discomfort because you need context. In order for discomfort to lead to an increased desire to learn rather than a heightened anxiety, an environment must be created with maximum psychological safety. 1942, this one's my favorite. So lastly, we have Carl Rogers, who was the founder of humanistic psychology. He didn't call it safety, but he did a lot of work about safety in relationship. The context he wrote about was the client-counselor relationship, but he also expanded that into relationships between people. Any relationship basically where growth and change is going to happen requires safety of the sort he described. And what he found was that in that sort of context, what you need to be able to grow and change are these three things, mainly. You need authenticity from the other person. You need empathy from the other person. And fondness, what he called unconditional positive regard, and I do not call that, within the context of the relationship. So when I say psychological safety, the hard parts, I'm talking about largely these hard parts. If someone's going to be safe in my presence, when someone is safe in my presence, it's because I'm bringing those things to the interaction or the relationship. So how do you do that? That's the big question. Authenticity, or being real, is probably the hardest part. It is learning to be okay with who you are so that you can be vulnerable and open and expose yourself. So when you describe how you're feeling, you're telling the truth, for example. Authenticity means being able to choose. Being able to choose to expose what you want to expose, but being the same on the inside as you are on the outside. Not fooling yourself or hiding from yourself. And that is exquisitely hard. Empathy is not the same thing as sympathy. Sympathy, let's see. If I tell someone I lost my job and they get terribly upset and suddenly I'm taking care of them, that's more like sympathy. Sympathy is when you take on somebody else's feelings. And it's exhausting. The empathy that I'm talking about is the ability to look at someone and see them for who they are, to see the similarities you have with them, to see where they're coming from and what the world looks like from their perspective, without losing yourself. And then lastly, fondness. The hard part of fondness is people are assholes. And how are you supposed to be fond of assholes? Right? So let's see if we can get there. This is Edgar Schein again. He was 1965. Humble inquiry is the fine art of drawing someone out, of asking questions to which you don't already know the answer, of building a relationship based on curiosity and interest in the other person. So he's talking about listening for real understanding, and he's also talking about curiosity, which you'll recall Amy Edmondson also talked about. So here's the thing. Like, Amy Edmondson says in a TED Talk, here's the three things people need, right? And the last one is curiosity. Modeling your own fallibility is also hard, but the last one's curiosity. And what we don't get to often enough is how you get to curiosity when somebody's an asshole, right? One of the quickest tricks I found for getting to curiosity from judgment is to listen to myself say, why would somebody do that? And hear it, and then change it to, why would somebody do that? Same words, totally different meaning. Someone once offered me this as a way of looking at the world if I choose to. Not as something that I can test scientifically, but as a model for looking at other people's behavior. What if everyone you meet is doing what they can to meet very human needs that you can understand by looking inside yourself? This is part of the exercise of getting to empathy, and it's hard. So I'm driving down the road, and someone cuts me off. Clearly, they're an asshole. And I'm, what's wrong with you? Why would they do that? And then if I think about it, and I use my imagination and my intention, I can imagine maybe this person has a migraine coming on. And they can't think about anything but getting home if they can do that. They're trying to keep from wrecking the car. Suddenly they don't look like an asshole. They look like a human being like me who has needs that are like mine. And I can start to understand what might have happened. So I go, okay, it's probably not that. I made that up, right? But maybe they really have to pee, you know? Maybe they're, even as we speak, having an argument with someone they love and can't think straight. I go, okay, well, I'd prefer you pull off the road to do that, but I can understand it, right? That's definitely something that a person similar to me could do to meet needs that I understand. That's how you start to transfer someone, to change someone in your mind from being an asshole to being a person that you can understand. And what I'm saying here about psychological safety is we all contribute to our own psychological safety by what we tell ourselves, and we contribute to the psychological safety of the people on our team. And that's a big load to carry, right? You can't just change company policy and suddenly everyone has psychological safety. It's on every person to help create that container for everyone else that they work with. That's hard. So sometimes it's really hard to empathize with someone, especially like, you know, the asshole on your team or on your old team who was really hard to listen to and didn't care what you had to say. And in that moment, you don't have a lot of safety coming at you, and it's really hard to empathize. When that happens, starting with empathizing with yourself can make a big difference. I'm reading the slides because my handwriting is bad, but self-empathy, nurturing yourself as a dear, beloved friend. Asking yourself, where does it hurt? So I'll offer you another version of this. What if you are doing what you can to meet very human needs that you can understand by looking inside yourself? So you can ask yourself, what is it about the situation that hurts? What are the needs that I'm not getting met? And you can ask yourself that with kindness and compassion. Does anybody ever have trouble forgiving themselves for something? Anybody ever an asshole?
It's on my business cards. Yeah.
So everything I just said applies to yourself, right? If you want to create psychological safety for yourself, for example, find those places in your head where you're telling yourself nasty things that you would never tell a friend and change them. Tell yourself kind things. So this is the basic message of empathy. It is use your imagination and your curiosity and your creativity to figure out how to see the other person as doing something that makes sense. Do you ever think nobody's ever doing the wrong thing from their own perspective? Nobody ever goes, you know what, I'm going to do the suboptimal thing in this circumstance. I'm going to do the dumbest thing I can think of. Nobody does that, right? You're always coming from a place that's the best you can do. Even if the constraints on the best you can do are pretty onerous, right? Person who always shows up late to stand up, what's going on? You know, often as not, what I find out is going on ranges from, well, coding until 4 o'clock in the morning is one thing. But it ranges from like insomnia to having a depressed spouse who it's really hard to leave in the morning, to having a special needs kid who needs a lot of attention and you never know how long it's going to take. Nobody sets out to do the wrong thing. So here's the steps that your organization can take. Framing the work as inherently uncertain is a habit you can get into. This is a learning problem, not a problem of doing the work faster or, right? We're not machines. Exposing your own fallibility goes back to the authenticity thing, right? Which then goes back to empathy for yourself. Exposing your own fallibility means finding a container where you can have some psychological safety. Pursue that. It's important. And then modeling curiosity. That's the thing you can't just put in a policy statement, right? You have to do the work inside to get there. So the journey is to move yourself from judgment to curiosity. If you want to be a safe space for someone else or create a safe container for people to work in and be creative together. So we have time for questions, comments.
I'll kick us off. I'm liking the vibe you're sending of you can't take care of anyone if you're not first taking care of yourself and respecting your own boundaries. Put on your own oxygen mask before you assist the passenger next to you. It's very important.
Do you know why? Why they tell you to put your oxygen mask on before your babies?
I do not.
If you don't have oxygen, you might pass out. You might get groggy or stupid, but you might just fall asleep. If you fall asleep, you and your baby both die. If your baby falls asleep, it doesn't have that much consequence. So it actually makes a huge difference. And I think it's still a really good analogy.
I like the Shine references too. You're, what's his model called? The organization?
Humble inquiry.
Huh?
Humble inquiry.
Humble inquiry.
Hey, I'm a big Terry Pratchett fan, and Commander Vimes has this thing that Chief Inspector, someone or other, has a thing called the algebra of necessity, which is the whole thing of like, if there's 3 of you in a boat, you know, whose lower leg do you eat first? Well, if you all give up a lower leg, nobody can escape the boat. If one person gives up, you know, and there's kind of like the whole kind of in brutal times, brutal things. And hamsters eat their own children if there's not enough food around, because if the mother dies, there's no chance for a future child, but if the mother survives, they can always be and that's kind of a necessity thing. Very good. I've now completely forgotten what my question was, so I'll hand the microphone back, and if I remember it, I'll ask. Yeah, it's gone. Sorry.
I have a comment. I know it's kind of weird that you got a bunch of nerds in here and you're talking about humanistic empathy and all these other things, but I went through the same phase. So I studied a lot of Dr. Wolfson's normalcy plans and things like that, and how to empathize and support other people and things like that. You'd be surprised where these lessons show up. Like if you're in a hot debate and you know you want to get some point across to a tech team and nobody's listening to you, you have to step back and say, okay, let's start from the beginning. Why do you feel this way? What are your thoughts? And and you create that safe space, and you actually, even though it takes a long time to get to that quote unquote safe space, you actually get better results.
Yeah, I want to comment on that a little bit. If you take on this work of meeting people with empathy, and you get into a conflict, like she said, there's work to do to get here. But the real trick is to set your own stuff aside and then get curious. And keep it there. Keep it, don't lose it, right? Get really curious. And ask them, draw them out. Because that's when people will start to listen to you, not until they've been heard. Unless they're doing the same work, and then you can compete to see who can be more empathetic. If you're in a meeting and one person is repeating themselves over and over again and they're being really loud, one of the ways you can deal with that is by looking at them, telling them what you heard them say, and making sure they feel heard. Which you wouldn't think, right? You'd think they would feel heard after they said it 13 times really loud. But they don't feel heard or they wouldn't be doing it.
We had a question in the back. And this ties into what Sal was discussing yesterday too. If you're gonna love people, you gotta love all their baggage too, right? Like we literally, I'm doing a talk with Vanessa at Go to Chicago next week, and part of what we're talking about is how we're getting into like dark triad, right? But you can't take the parts of people you like and leave the rest. You have to embrace the whole thing, right?
This was really interesting. Thank you. The lens I was coming back to as I was viewing this is I'm trying to hire a lot of people onto my team, and I'm thinking about like how can I kind of impart these messages, especially on newer, maybe new grads or just younger people without as much industry experience. Do you have any particular thoughts on how, from more of kind of a management or tech lead kind of perspective, these kinds of concepts can be kind of diffused through a team?
The biggest trick I have discovered myself doing, which isn't really a trick, but it is a pattern, is I found myself blurting things out and just saying what I was thinking. And it turns out that's kind of effective as a modeling technique. I remember when we were talking about team agreements, everybody wanted to be listened to. Can we try that now, for example? But just to say out loud what it is that we all value helps a lot. And then there's the modeling, right? Modeling your own willingness to be fallible and your own curiosity. I'm going to say something else. I can't remember.
We talk a lot about fail-safe experimentation, and it's often from a technical perspective, like let's launch this thing in production and see what happens. But that also works at a team level, right? Where you can set up some fail-safe room for people to be open and enter that space yourself. Open the vulnerability personally. I've had luck with that. Yeah. Even during Alyssa's talk, me saying, hey, they were talking about stuff I didn't fully understand, right? Like I don't know all this. There's plenty of stuff I'm not familiar with. That's why I like doing these, because I learn, and that's what you end up getting out of fail-safe experimentation. When there is failure, you learn from it, right? And it's important to grab that failure and take the time and spend the operational expense to get the learning out, which Nathan had the open space on blameless postmortems ago yesterday. So catching people when they're hot and the emotional energy is up, and if you've got something like a blameless postmortem process established, you don't do the full thing because you don't have a production outage, but you can use that as an enabling constraint to get a productive conversation out of it. Takes practice, though, definitely.
Who doesn't have a production outage?
What's that?
Who doesn't have a production outage?
Well, right. If your team is not talking, fair point, if your team's pissed and not talking to each other and they're actively infighting, you have a production outage, right? Is that fair? That's not good.
And soon, literally.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah.
First, these are some of the most beautiful high impact slides. I've seen in a long time, and I'm really inspired about it. So thank you for all the effort that you put into that. And I was so grateful to see you talk about psychological safety. This is really just appreciation, not a question. We don't talk about that very much. I haven't seen that study referenced very much. I think it's incredibly important that employers create hostile spaces and then blame the workers when things go badly. And so really, no question, just very grateful for your talk. Thank you.
Thanks.
We got a comment over here. Maybe it's a question. I see a hand up. That's all I know right now. And I like that we've got safety in this space where it's not like you have to have a question. If it's not a question, I'm taking the mic back. It's like, no, share your thoughts.
This is actually a question. I want your opinion, particularly regarding the empathy that you mentioned. You work for a company basically for several years. You learn, the company actually has tremendous growth and whatever. And in that process, actually, sometimes there is a chance for the hostile environment, basically, where you learn, take the hard road to actually get to where you are. Then you have, new developers or new teammates actually joining the company. While the process has improved, sometimes actually process actually still has a resemblance of those hostilities or whatever. How do you actually mentor the newly joined teammates, basically, when you are in the leader position, basically, be empathetic, actually, you took that road, basically. How do you actually mentor them, basically, where the things are actually a little bit still the same?
So how do you create psychological safety when they may not have safety? I'm a big fan of realism, and so I guess being really honest about the context is where I would start. Creating safety within the team is possible. Cultivating safety within the team. You can't really create it all by yourself. But awareness of what's going on outside is also really important. I don't think people can have safety if it's not real. If they're being misled. Does that make sense? Somebody asked me about the connection between a sense of safety and actual safety. And this person thinks actual safety is the only thing that matters. But obviously a sense of safety is important if what we're trying to do is be able to think straight, right? It's the sense of safety that lets me do a nonogram without screwing it up. But the actual safety is, I guess I think if we're paying attention, if we're fully awake and attentive, those things are going to line up, actual safety and sense of safety. And trying to elevate one when the other one's not matching it is probably a really bad idea.
Yeah, and it's who's providing air cover, right? I volunteer as tribute often. It's like, talk to me, tell me what we need. I'll go talk to leadership, and if anybody gets shot down, I can own it. And it was, Nathan offered to pitch an open space yesterday. I actually had somebody grab me yesterday afternoon and say it was nice of Nathan to do that, but I don't know Nathan, and he's like famous on the internet. So can you pitch this open space for me tomorrow? And it's like, sure, I'm happy to. But like I didn't even cross my mind, right? But I can pitch your open space if you don't want to ask Nathan to do it. So yeah, Nathan's just a dude.
Maybe a question. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I just wanted to mention the fact that sometimes when I hear people talk about psychological safety, they conflate safety with comfort, and they're really, really not the same things.
Really.
If I'm safe enough to be uncomfortable, to move into a space that's uncomfortable, to have difficult conversations, to work through conflict. And I think some people feel comfortable, so they feel like that's safety because, being in my team's a comfortable place to be. But to me, they're not the same, and I'd be interested to know what you think.
Yeah, remember the slide in the beginning with the bar with green and red. Comfort is where we go when we don't have safety, right? Safety gives us resilience to create and to challenge ourselves and to, deal with conflict. I agree with you entirely.
It may be comfortable to run things in prod with default configurations, but it is not safe. So on that note, we're at time. Thanks everybody for participating, and in particular, thanks to Alex for such an excellent presentation.
Thank you all.